There's a way to live with the pain, you know. A vampirism scratching at my neck won't leave me alone. Will you see yourself back in the sun? The light it stings while the night it sings to me. And I'm normal how a story I can't tell, but they'll see the gift they've given to me. I could step aside, I could end this life, but this disease, it won't release, it won't be cured by the night. I guess I'm never coming back. I'm only on.
Good evening and welcome to the St. Pete by Night Twitch channel where we play St. Petersburg by Night, a massive multiplayer 5th edition World of Darkness chronicle set in the city of St. Petersburg, Florida. My name is Kent, also known as Misha Kent, and I am the lead storyteller of St. Pete by Night. But here on Saturday nights, I play the host of After Dark. For those who are just tuning in for the first time, After Dark is our behind-the-scenes program where we talk to players, we talk to storytellers, we talk to coteries and packs and cells, but we also talk to movers and shakers in the world of darkness, people who are making their name out there, people who have, had a presence within this incredible community and this hobby that we love so much. And some of those individuals have even been able to turn this hobby into a profession, which is one of the most admirable things I can possibly think of. So as the next part of our Professional Storyteller series that has kind of come into existence here on After Dark, we are talking to a very special guest, Byrne Baby Byrne over on Start Playing. We've had the opportunity to have several Start Playing storytellers on here, and I'm super excited to talk to each and every one of them because it provides a new opportunity to get to know how they discovered the world of darkness, how they got into this game, and how they had the courage, the talent, and the ability to not only turn this from a hobby into a profession, but to be very, very successful at it. And with the research I've done, Byrne Baby Byrne is very, very successful at this. But we're going to get into that in just a second. I'd like to give Byrne this opportunity to introduce themselves. Take it away.
Well, hello, and thanks for having me. I got such a lead up. I can't imagine that anything that I could say about myself would possibly come close without sounding maybe like I was a little bit infatuated with myself.
I gotta be honest though, it's a very, very impressive CV. Like just looking over your website, looking over your Start Playing profile, like you came so prepared to the table with so much information, and seeing the amount of games you run per week and everything, it's just absolutely incredible. But please, I cut you off. Continue.
Well, that's his shorthand for saying that I'm a big nerd and I have a website. And I was originally an academic, so I just sort of took all those like nerdy skills that I had learned in academia and just transplanted them to a very different nerdy arena. But I kept the nerd juices flowing. So that's been like the through line for my entire career. But yes, I am known as Byrne Baby Byrne, and I go by that because it's a little bit safer than my name, which is Neve. It's spelled Niamh. And it rhymes with Steve. I know it doesn't look like it does, but I promise you that is how you say the name. But just Byrne Baby Byrne. It's totally fine.
Well,
That's
I think it's wonderful, and I loved like the tag of the name. It's something that's going to stick in your head. It's something that you're going to remember, and it's a fantastic branding opportunity, which is really important. Like you got to stand out as a professional ST. You've got to have a name that sticks in people's heads, and you do such a good job of that. But we'll get into all the professional ST stuff later. I want to talk about how you first discovered TTRPGs as a whole, not just World of Darkness, but TTRPGs as a whole, and if you had any preconceived notions about them before, getting into the hobby itself.
So I have possibly like the least feminist introduction to the world of darkness that one could imagine, which is a shame because like a lot of my academic work has dealt with women's issues. And I work very hard to be inclusive and to include, women in my story in ways that are meaningful, which is sometimes an area where TTRPGs can fall short.
Absolutely.
But my intro to the hobby is very much not in keeping with that. I actually had a crush on a goth guy. I was 13. I had a crush on this goth dude. His name was Jeff. Hi, Jeff. If you happen to stumble across this. Um, and I just thought he was like the hottest guy. Like he had like a wallet chain and like a belt with studs. And I am like chef's kiss of fashion, dialed it in, which tells you something about like the person that I am. But I have the hots for him, really bad. And he's like, "Hey, I'm like playing this game. It's like no big deal, but it's Vampire the Masquerade. Do you want to play?" And I'm like, "Well, I guess I could. Maybe I'll see if I'm free." But inside, I'm like, "Yes, yes, 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 yes." Um, so I went out, I took like all of the money that I had managed to stockpile, and I bought like the source book and the player's guide or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, when I started playing, Jeff ended up being not great as a storyteller. He abdicated his role after like a month and a half, and I took over his Chicago by Night game.
Wow. Okay, so you
So
got thrown into the deep end immediately, like
it
almost.
turned out I had the real taste for it. I was really quite good at it, and I really liked being the storyteller. Not super proud of like some of my cringy first characters,
Everyone has
but
it.
oh god, it was the worst. Like my first prince. I didn't have the coveted Chicago by Night core book,
Right.
so I made my own prince, and his name was Adrian Dark. Was so totally pure, and it was so fucking cringy.
But
I'm sorry,
that's
can I cuss? Am I
no,
free to
absolutely, absolutely.
without
Cuss
restraint?
away. Yeah, absolutely. No, it's a
Um,
18 plus kind of stream as it is, so you're good.
so that was my introduction. I liked a goth guy with a wallet chain and emo bangs. So I decided to play vampire. But once I was actually in it, I found out I really liked it. The themes really spoke to me. And then when I felt I had to take over the role of storyteller, it was a natural fit. I really enjoyed being the GM more than I enjoyed playing. And I don't know what that reveals about me. I feel like it
No,
might be
there's
something, but
I I think it's something that calls to certain people. So I would ask some follow-up questions because you said you came from academia. Do you have any kind of like theater background or anything involved in like those kind of creative exploits, or was this sort of a first for you?
oh, I was like a theater kid in high school. Yeah, exactly. So
Me
I
too.
did theater. I also did like theater in college,
Yeah.
but purely in a hobby sense. That was not like what I studied or anything like that. But yeah, like I do feel like there's like a theater kid sort of vibe running through World of Darkness players and GMs.
No,
Um,
it's one of the things that I think appeals so much about TTRPGs is that they can speak to all different kinds of people. I think theater kids especially excel at it. But if you're like really into math, you can find something about it. If you're really into world building and kind of writing and creative endeavors, there's something for you in it. But I do think theater kids excel at the improvisation of it all and the, inhabiting a character and everything like that.
Yeah, it's fun. Like
It is.
doing the voices is fun. Role playing the characters' mannerisms is fun. Getting dressed up, that's fun. I'm into it. Like I'm here for all of it. But my PhD is actually philosophy.
Oh,
So
really? Okay.
that has a great deal to do with the moral themes in Vampire the Masquerade specifically.
Definitely.
Um, the other World of Darkness games, for me, fall short when it comes to interrogating moral questions. They don't
Interesting.
quite scratch the itch the way Vampire does. But
I think there has been an evolution in fifth edition where they do focus a lot more on the morality of it. Like I'm the primary werewolf storyteller on our server, and I never liked werewolf in the older editions. I never pursued it, but then I checked out fifth edition. I started learning it, and I really do like the morality of fifth edition werewolf and even hunter. And I feel like they're really doing a good job of focusing on the characterization of the characters and less the lore and everything like that. They're really making you go through your own personal journey. And so I do appreciate that about it. But I do agree that Vampire raises so many more moral questions than any other game.
so I actually love Hunter too. I think my ranking of like the World of Darkness, like the big games, goes Vampire first because like you never forget your first
You
love,
never do.
right? And that's my first love when it comes to TTRPGs. Vampires first. Hunter is like a close second, but depending on my mood, it can sort of like flip from Hunter to Wraith because I also am still that Molgoth at a heart, like crushing on the wallet chain guy.
Absolutely.
Werewolf I had a hard time getting into, not gonna lie.
Right.
The older editions I had a real hard time trying to find something that spoke to me.
There was a lot, and I think there was a lot of contradiction. There was a lot of issues in the older editions with obviously, certain cultural elements,
Yeah.
cultural appropriation. But I think that was the case really across the board of all the splats. It was the 90s, you know what I mean? Like, and that doesn't necessarily excuse it now, but you got to think about the time period. You got to think of it through that lens. But now we can look back in retrospect and be like, ooh, they did some very problematic things that they are thankfully repairing now. But I love to hear that you enjoy Wraith because that is, I'm fingers crossed, really hoping that's one of their next releases because I really want it.
Wraith is so good. I never loved Changeling, and I know like mostly it's fine. It's like honestly pretty mid. And please don't come for me. Please don't add me and like get them all in my X feed.
You're
Like
not the
twist.
first to say it. You won't be the last. We do have some Changeling fans on the, that
Yeah,
watch these streams, but we also have people who are criticizers of Changeling, so it's okay.
like the real stands are made. And I don't love mage. And I have met some like rabid mage stands like
Oh,
out there.
absolutely.
They will die on that hill. Um, that mage is the best World of Darkness game. Well, I'm not sure. If you want to play mage, play mage. I'm happy for you by all means. I just don't want to GM it, man. Like I don't want to GM that game.
Well, we try to incorporate all the splats into the St. Pete server, and Mage is the one I'll admit, I'm looking forward to the least. Not just because it takes things to a whole new level in terms of what the mages can do, but also because I want to make sure if they're gonna re-release it that they do their due diligence and make sure the mechanics are balanced. Because one of my biggest compliments for 5th edition so far is that everything has been more balanced than ever before. You could have a hunter vampire crossover. You could have a werewolf vampire crossover, and it's not as broken as in the older editions and 20th
Yes.
anniversary wouldn't
If
have
you
worked.
want to have a werewolf in your vampire game, like fuck you. Like they're
It
just
wasn't gonna happen. It was not
vampires
gonna
apart.
happen.
Yeah, there's not even a it doesn't even pretend like it has balanced those powers in the earlier editions. Um yeah, I appreciate the endeavor. There's a lot that I appreciate with V5
Hmm.
that I like about the direction that the World of Darkness is going in.
Yeah, and there are plenty of criticisms that I think are perfectly valid about 5th edition too, especially for diehards of the older systems. Like, I get some of the frustrations that come into that, but I want to talk about that a little bit later when we're talking about the future World of Darkness. As for TTRPGs in your past, I want to learn more. What do you remember about your first character in that Crush campaign? What do you remember? Do you remember what clan they were? Do you remember the concept? What can you recall about that?
I do. I remember. like the first character I made was a Nosferatu.
Really?
Yeah, I know, right? Like I'm playing against type here. You would say Toreador.
I
That's
absolutely would have said Toreador right
um,
away.
but Nosferatu is actually my favorite clan.
Oh,
It's a
really?
big
Okay.
across the board. Yeah, hands down. I'm a Nossie kind of gal. Her name was Enola because it's alone backwards.
Yes.
Um, so I thought that was like the most clever name you could have for your Nos character. And she like struck terror into the hearts of men, like with her appearance.
Nice.
That was like her whole thing. It's like she was horrifying to look at, but she found her horrifying appearance liberating because she didn't feel like she had to like perform any
Right.
engage in any performances anymore. So that was my first character ever, and I thought I was deep. I thought I was really inside. I thought I was doing something.
Well, you had to impress the
Something.
storyteller. You had to come out the gate swinging and make a mark.
He didn't like it. He really revealed himself. Again, hi Jeff, if you're out there. He kept trying to push me towards like, somebody very like, I don't know, leather clad situation happening, more conventional vamp. But even at that young age, I really wanted to terrify more than titillate. So I went the Nos direction.
I love
In,
that.
in spite of the fact that like there was probably a better way to engage in the dance of romance
Oh,
than
for
I
sure.
was
You had to
participating.
play the flirty, fetishist Toreador apparently to get that attention. But I love that Nos was your first instinct because we've had a lot of new players join the server, and we always get the "I don't want to be ugly" is the statement, and I'm like,
Oh,
no, you
not.
don't understand. Like that's so much fun. Like that's such a cool element to have and a challenge to overcome. And I think that World of Darkness games are all about overcoming the challenges. Like giving yourself as many failures as possible to have to dig yourself out of. And that's something they did really well in the old editions with the amount of merits and flaws you could have before versus
Oh,
now where
sure.
it's cut down a little bit more.
He speaks truth. New players out there, go Nos.
Oh yeah.
It's the best clan. Highly recommend it. It's the clan I play when I am a player. Always. Sometimes if I want a little flavor, I'll go Malkavian. But yeah, exactly. Let's go. But yeah, that was the clan that really spoke to me.
So once you had your first experience, your first taste of TTRPGing, which clearly quickly led into storytelling, did you explore any other games? Did you try D&D or any of those, or were you just hooked into World of Darkness and that was kind of your ride or die?
I did play D&D. Um, it didn't work out. It
What
didn't go
what
well.
why do you think that was?
Trigger warning for sensitive viewers out there. This may include stories of people being fucking creepy.
Oh, well
So
that doesn't help.
please put on your um, creep proof big girl pants and let's have a conversation about my experience with D&D. So I grew up in like I say I'm from Chicago, but I actually grew up in a little town
Okay.
just outside of the Chicago area. And the way that you would find like a TTRPG group in that little town is probably the way that like many of y'all find your groups in real life by going to your game store and like seeing what they're running. Like they would post searching for group ads on this like bulletin board, which maybe I'm dating myself. But
No, I'm with you.
um, and you would like pull the number off or whatever
Mm-hmm.
and call it. And there was this dude who was running a D&D campaign. And I thought, well, I really enjoy Vampire. and I really like these other TTRPGs, like these other World of Darkness games, maybe I could do D&D too. So I go to this group, and it's like a bunch of dudes in their 20s ish. So already not loving the vibe. It was I by this time I was in my late teens, so like 17, maybe 16. I don't remember. Square ballpark there. I go there, the GM sort of gives me this very condescending instruction, like protocol for rolling the character. So I made this like elf, and I'm like, I'm gonna see where this goes. The few sessions that I played, they ended up allocating just these very passive roles to me. Like they had me tending the fire or standing lookout, and he would ask all of the other players what they wanted to do first. Like, do you want to like go and scout ahead, or do you want to be the face or whatever? And I always was last in that sequence. And when I pushed back and challenged, why am I consistently coming last? Even when I was a rogue, so even when it seems like my specialty would be relevant
Right.
here, he's like, it's just a seniority thing. They've been at the table longer. And I'm like, I'm a girl, basically. I'm like a kid surrounded by grown-ass men. And I'm like, okay, sure, whatever, fine. It's a seniority thing. So finally, I'm like, I'm sick of this. I'm going off on my own. So my character like left the horses and like stopped tending the fire or whatever bullshit busy work they had given me for that session. The GM jumped me with 3 were tigers.
Jeez.
Um, I know, right? And so my character was more or less ripped to pieces almost instantaneously. If you were to look up like railroading in like TTRPG slang, that is how you railroad a player. You just rip them apart the first time they don't do something that you want.
Right, and that's not a good way to initiate people into a new game and a new hobby and a new group.
Oh,
Like you want to make them
oh,
feel welcome and stuff. That's
that's not
crazy.
that's not it. So the other party members found me, and like the mage or like whatever wizard, I don't remember the classes. Sorry, please again don't at me. I'm not a D&D girl. The magic user in the party had something called the Ring of Regeneration, and he put it on me so that like I would heal basically. And after he healed me, he asked my character to marry him. And my character is like, no, that's very weird.
Oh
Hard
boy.
on that. But ultimately, his character SA'd my character.
That's
Like,
crazy.
I know, and the DM didn't do shit about it. And I was just sort of gobsmacked
Well,
by,
it's funny because your experience is kind of the opposite of previous experiences in the 90s and the aughts, where people who were discovering vampire and World of Darkness games were experiencing a very toxic environment from that time period. But it sounds like it was kind of the reverse for you, where you started off in a good environment with World of Darkness, and then moving over to D&D, it became a little more toxic.
I quickly learned that the more agency.
Uh-oh, looks like we froze here for a second. Just stick with us.
Are we back?
Yes, we're back. Go for it.
Okay. Sorry about that. I
It's
don't know if
okay.
it was me or you or what was up. Um, I quickly learned that the more agency I had in the story, the less toxic I could make it for myself. Um,
Yeah.
so like had I gone the weird leather clad, again, no shade if you play a Toreador clad in leather. Um, had I gone that route, I might have had a very hypersexualized experience with VCM. But I
Absolutely.
think the reason why I didn't is because I picked the least sexy of all clans, the Nosferatu. Um, and like the way that I described Enola was so gross. I think it actively deterred all of the other players
Well,
from trying to get with my character.
that's a really good strategy, to be honest, to make your mark early on like that, to really like initiate yourself as a player, because I think that there are some stereotypes that people think of when they think of vampires and vampire games and that kind of thing. And to buck that stereotype, to go across into a different concept like that, I think says like, I'm here to play. I'm here to be serious. I'm not here to flirt. I'm not here to find a, a partner. I'm here to get into the game, tell a story, play a game. Like really, I'm serious about this, and I think that that's really really cool.
I did have very creepy experiences with vampire later, so it was just more of a delayed sort of situation, um, as opposed to like a totally defy defying the convention situation. It was just
Right.
more delayed. But that D&D game, I was like, what the fuck?
That's
I get out of
wild.
here.
So how long did you run that Chicago game? Like how long did you continue that chronicle, and where did you go from there afterwards?
So I was that storyteller. I ran the chronicle for 2 years with the original group, which was
And it's your
um
first chronicle
yeah,
too,
it
which is
was
crazy.
which is um not typical to run your first
No.
chronicle for 2 years. But like players started to dip because they were like graduating or they got part-time jobs, and I would be like that girl who like called them up and I'm like, yeah, so we're playing on Saturday, right? And they're like, actually, like I can't, I'm gonna be there, I'm gonna be somewhere else. And I'm like, oh, so Sunday? And like they were totally giving me these signals that they they had moved on temporarily from the hobby, and I just wasn't like connecting with it. Eventually I did get the message and I had to post my own looking for
Yeah, and
group.
so you keep progressing, you keep pushing forward in this hobby because you clearly felt an attachment to it and an interest in it and a knack for being a storyteller. Like I said, to be immediately thrown into your first storytelling position within a month of even starting this new hobby and then running that game for 2 years, like that is an amazing accomplishment in its own right. I know a lot of people are very hesitant about taking a role of storyteller or something like that, especially early on. But it sounds like it really called to you and you really felt comfortable with it right out the gate.
um for sure, I really enjoy world building. That's probably like my favorite part. um I do like inhabiting the characters and like giving the performance, but I like the idea of inventing like these long-standing Machiavellian plots and creating these really troubled, imperfect, flawed characters and populating the world with them. Um, so it really was a natural fit. I also was at the same time, and this is still true of me, doing like fiction writing. So it was sort of, I viewed it as of a piece, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm building worlds and stories and then that are on paper, and then I'm building these worlds in the TTRPG realm, that we're playing through and that we get to see realized, and then I get to do collaboratively, and I also get to do voices. So it was just the total
Yeah, it
package.
appeals to the world builder, the writer, and the actor in you in wanting to do, that you're able to exercise all of these abilities and all of these talents. And that's absolutely fantastic. This is actually a great transition because you talked about world building, and in my research about you, Atlanta by Night. Tell me how this came to be because this isn't just one chronicle that you run. This is multiple groups all in the same setting. You have lots of opportunities for people to join this game. How did the inspiration for Atlanta by Night start, and what was that development and execution process like?
I'm a huge fan of like the Southern Gothic genre, in general. I love um like a lot of the stories that fall under the rubric of like Southern Gothic, but maybe outside the horror genre. But I'm particularly keen on Southern Gothic stories that fall within the bounds of horror. And I wanted a city, and I initially started off with New Orleans,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
it's so done by like Anne Rice, mostly Anne Rice,
Right.
as the principal creator, that there wasn't like a lot to say. But there are a lot of parallels between like Georgia and Louisiana,
Yeah.
and the city of Atlanta kind of struck me because it is in its own way exceptionalist. It's like this like liberal, um liberalish
Liberalish.
liberalish
Depending on
city.
what part of Atlanta, yeah.
Yeah, liberal, we'll call it liberal adjacent
Yeah.
city in the Bible Belt. And it that sort of mix of like the old Southern Bible Belt values, and then like this cosmopolitan city really spoke to me. And it gave me an opportunity to juxtapose like quintessential Southern Gothic elements, which tend to revolve around the decayed and the desiccated and the collision of tradition with with modernity. It gave me an opportunity to play with those things in the context of a city that I thought would appeal to like a commercial audience, a city like Atlanta.
Well, and
I
Atlanta is a great city too because it is a massive kind of important city. I mean, it's one of the few cities that I think people all over the world can name off the bat as cities that are part of America. So it does involve a lot of Americana. It has a very rich history, and the city itself provides so many amazing storytelling opportunities because there are all these locations, all of these different cultures. Like it's a very big melting pot of cultures and opportunities, and there's different districts and different locations, and there's just so much to the city that you're never going to run out of inspiration or opportunity. You know, you tell a game in a small town, there's really only so much that small town has to offer. But in a major city like Atlanta, you know, it's got a huge airport, it's got the Coca-Cola factory, it's got the baseball stadium, it's got all of this and more, and it's just massive. Like massive, massive.
The most important part that you are forgetting is it has an aquarium,
The
and
aquarium, of
you
course.
swim with whale sharks in that aquarium.
Yeah, so there's just so many storytelling
Yeah,
opportunities there.
exactly. Right, right, right. As vampires famously love animal encounter.
Yeah, right.
That's part of that. That's the deep lore. If you're new to the world of darkness, you probably don't get it. But yeah. Uh, I I kind of like the aquarium. To
No,
be
I think
honest,
it's a fantastic, yeah,
yeah.
fantastic location.
Yes. So Atlanta was a city that spoke to me. In all fairness, my flagship city is not Atlanta. It's actually Detroit. Um,
Really? As a Detroit kid, that makes me happy. I was
I
born and raised in Michigan, so yeah.
I live in Detroit, in Midtown, in
Okay,
fact.
okay.
So it remains my most treasured and long running campaign. It's actually my Detroit by Night campaign,
Right.
on Sundays at 8 p.m. Eastern on Start Playing. But yes, it's not. It's full, so unfortunately nobody can join it.
Right.
But
But it
yeah,
is an ongoing campaign and it's something you're familiar with. Had you had any previous experience in Atlanta and how much research did you have to do in designing that game?
I had been to Atlanta. I had to do a fair amount of research. Um, on average, I probably spend about a month and a half of just absorbing things before I sit down to make characters or write a story
Right.
for players. So the process really looks different depending on the place. but it tends to start with like this very big picture research project of like going through the Wikipedia entries and things like that, to reading historical books or biographies of important figures. And by the end, I am the most annoying person because I like know so much like weird trivia about the place where I'm running the story. And I also did a master's in anthropology. So like Georgia is a fascinating cultural place too.
Absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely. Especially Atlanta. Like I said, it's a very strong melting pot. There's a lot of different cultures that kind of blend in to create the fabric that is Atlanta.
sure.
Yeah, so that makes sense. And I always admire people who do storytelling in cities that they don't live in. We've had a lot of guests on on the show who talk about historical time periods or places that they've set stories in that they themselves have never encountered, and the amount of effort that goes into preparing for something like that and really immersing yourself in it, I think is so fascinating and so, again, admirable, because you do want to make it accurate. Like, why set it in a city you're not familiar with? In that case, just set it anywhere. It doesn't matter what you call it. But by bringing that authenticity to the game of making sure that you did your homework and that you know that location well, I think brings a whole new element in and really is a sign of a very experienced and talented storyteller.
Well, thank you. That's very nice. You're very nice. Um, I agree. I think that if you're going to set a city in a specific place, then it should feel very much like that place. The
Yes.
vibe should be on point. Chicago should feel like Chicago. Detroit should feel like Detroit. And I'm very much a strong believer that cities aren't interchangeable.
No.
So SPCs that work in one setting don't work in another city. And I actually think there's no such thing as an all-purpose player character
Right.
either. Because like player characters like SPCs are very much a reflection of the place where we're located. So I do ask my players to also kind of go on this trip with me
Yeah.
if we're going into a city.
No, I definitely encourage people, like players, to do their own research when creating a character for a specific campaign, because you got to consider, like, why are they there? What drew them to this particular location other than, oh well, that's where the game is set and I want to play the game? Like, what about the character draws them to Atlanta or to Detroit or anything like that? Why would they stay there? Why, what's going to keep them from sticking out like a sore thumb, which you don't want to do in Vampire. You need to blend in. So you have to have an understanding of the area, an understanding of the culture, if you're not going to out yourself as, an outsider, because that kind of stuff gets noticed and that's how you break the masquerade. So, you really do have to have an understanding and a route to bring you into and make you a part of the setting.
I have left money on the table before when players come to me with a character who can't explain like why they're even in the location in the first place,
Yeah.
Um, and I just passed on the characters that they created because it does kind of ruin the vibe when you
Yeah.
have players who feel like they belong, or not players, but player characters who feel like they belong in another story or another time. Or
Yes.
when you get the vibe that the players really want to play a different story than what you're really talking about,
Yeah.
but they're here because this like works for them, like schedule wise or whatever.
No, absolutely. You want to make sure that they feel a part of this and that it makes sense for them to be a part of this. I think that's why I really appreciate World of Darkness, is because it stresses the collaboration nature of storytelling. Like, yes, the storytellers do a lot of heavy lifting. No comments about that. But I think that there is a certain part of like bringing your players into it as well and making sure that they have some sort of impact or say without going too dramatically against your concept and your story. Like D&D, it's kind of plug and play. You can just pick a class, pick a race, throw it into a setting, and it'll be fine. But in World of Darkness, I feel like there is a lot more to consider, a lot more to it. You're not going to have, I came from a small village and my parents were murdered and now I'm vengeful against this thing. Like, no, you have to have some of those setting elements brought into the character, or else it's not going to have the impact, and it could be very awkward and clunky in terms of how the story runs. So yeah, I always encourage players to do their own research and to at least get a feel for or vibe for an area.
Yeah, I do ask my players to have points of contact. So for their characters to have points of contact when they come into my games, either an SPC that they know, or like some institution that they're a part of, or maybe family they have in the area, but some reason to be in this city
Yep.
doing this thing. Because if you don't, you start to reach what I tend to think of as like your desperation story hooks, right? Like,
Right.
Prince is gonna kill you if you don't do this thing, and that's your character's motivation to do it. Which is like what you do when you're desperately attempting to get everybody to bite on the story hook. Or
Yeah, there are
like
like fallback story points that
exactly.
you just are like, I need something. Let's just throw this in there, throw this at it. Yeah.
Yeah. But it doesn't feel as satisfying as when the player's own background or the player's own internal motivations lead them to participating in your story, which is what you ideally want. Is you want the story, the character's background to point into the story.
Now, something I find fascinating about your Atlanta setting is you run multiple different sessions all set in the same area. So, Atlanta, you have so many opportunities for people to join in. Are those all kind of part of one massive world, or are you telling a storyline and giving other people opportunities to participate in that storyline? Like, how do you make it all work in the way you run it?
So technically, all of my games, regardless of the city, are set in the same universe.
Okay.
So the Detroit game and the Chicago game and the New Orleans game and the LA game and the New York game and the Atlanta game all happen in the same universe, roughly in the same timeline. Which can get quite confusing because the reality is if you have 4 tables in the same city, one of them is going to kill your principal SPC. Like, at least one of them is going to set out to just straight up murk them,
Yeah.
and throw everything into disarray. So as a general rule, my tables in the same city don't interact with one another, and
Okay.
that's quite easy in a city like Atlanta,
Yeah.
because it's so massive,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
In a city like Detroit, that's a little bit more difficult because the population's smaller. So it becomes increasingly difficult to justify, like, well, why haven't we met Tim's coterie, right? Like,
Right.
it feels like we'd run into each other. So in those games, I segregate them by cam and anarch. So it explains why there's not as much like cross
Right.
pollination between the table. I have done like crossovers where I've had other tables join in for a session or two for like a universe wide event.
Right.
Um, but as a general rule, if you're in the same city, you're not going to interact much, but you can impact the events and the timeline that governs the whole universe. And the way that it works is I tend to take consensus. So if like 3 out of 4 of my worlds didn't kill the SPC doesn't die. They continue forward. And what it ultimately looks like is that each table sees some reflection of the events that happened in their game in the official timeline.
Sure.
I have not discovered a perfect way to run simultaneously run campaigns set in the same city at the same time, without running the risk of fucking up a timeline.
Let me tell you, it's very difficult because that's what
I
we do
can relate.
here. We have multiple storytellers and multiple tables all running in the same universe, able to impact each other. It's a lot of management. And we
I
actually even had to stop doing that to a certain point because it was so hard to manage.
Yeah. I believe you. It seems like a task that would be approachable if you had multiple people, but as a single person running multiple games in a shared universe, do the best I can. I average them. That's the
I
best that
understand. It started with just me as the storyteller for several months, so I totally understand where you're coming from. You gave such an impressive list of cities there. Is there a city that is kind of like a dream city that you'd like to run a story in but have not yet? Or a time period, maybe a city in a specific time period like Roaring 20s or, Victorian
yeah,
era London or something like that.
sure, Roaring Twenties. I would like to do a snapshot of my world for the Roaring Twenties. That's probably my favorite historical time period. And Detroit was very interesting for the Roaring Twenties.
Yeah,
I think it would be
absolutely.
very cool to do a campaign set in that time.
So, what was the decision that you made? I want to talk about you deciding to become a professional ST because that takes so much courage and that takes so much confidence in what you do to make that leap. And I'm so impressed by anybody who does it because, for most of my gaming career, TTRPGs were kind of a guilty pleasure. It was this hidden secret. It was something nobody really publicly advertised up until the pandemic, until, everybody got locked in and TTRPGs had this boom. It was kind of this thing that was just your secret hobby that you really enjoyed, but you could never consider monetizing. You could never consider, making a living off of, but you do it. You do it well, obviously, from how well trafficked your website is, from your start playing page, everything like that. What was the decision or the moment that made you decide to take that leap and take that opportunity?
That's kind of like a hard and like a multi-tiered question to answer. So the big picture answer is just um, academia is one of those fields where you can just pour your like passion and intellectual energy into and not really see any rewards ever. Like I knew people who had been adjunct professors for like a decade and they're still barely scraping by.
Yeah,
And my particular field is not a field that is super friendly to women, although that's changing and there is some
good.
awareness about the absence of women in like philosophy. Um, it wasn't hugely accommodating, and I just decided, man, I don't like this. I don't want to continue to do this. And it seemed like my life as an adjunct would be prolonged indefinitely. So what being an adjunct means is your contract would be up for renewal potentially on like a semester by semester basis or a year by year basis. You wouldn't get any benefits. The pay's not great. You got like your last chance of classes. You had to work like the weird early morning
Right.
classes.
Fill in whatever
Like
everyone else doesn't want to do. Yeah.
professors don't really want that doesn't speak to them. Um, so it's just like I don't want to do this forever. And if I want to take a risk and do something that doesn't have any safety net under it, I'm just gonna go ahead and do this. I had read about start playing actually in like a write-up on some like maybe it was Dicebreaker. I don't remember. Don't quote me. And I'm like, I'm just gonna try. The worst thing that happens is I don't succeed. And so I started a few campaigns and they ended up taking off. And I'm like, well, this could be viable. I had set in my mind an imaginary target at which I would think this was a viable um, career path for me. And I think I had set like, this is embarrassing, a target of 600 a week
Okay.
take home. Um, and I hit that quicker than I expected. So I'm like, okay, well, this changes the calculus.
Sure.
And I ended up leaving my teaching job and diving full on to this and building on that momentum and going forward. But like the multi-tiered answer is I've never really, for somebody who does philosophy, I actually don't devote a lot of thought to these kinds of like decisions. I have always, when I see an interesting job, I have always just sort of went for it. So I have been like a bartender, and I've been a tour guide for Detroit. Um, I have been a field researcher for an archaeological dig in the Michigan area. Whenever I've seen an interesting job, I've just sort of gone for it and haven't really thought too much about the potential downstream problems. And so I'm like, this could just be an interesting little line on the CV, and then we'll move on and we'll continue doing the academia thing. But instead, um, this ended up becoming more than a line on my CV. Let's just put it that
Yeah.
way.
Well, and I think that's the mindset and attitude you have to go into this kinds of things. Of just like, I'm going to try stuff. I'm going to throw myself into stuff. Like anxiety, fear, fear of failure. All these things are, I think, some of the biggest deterrents that keep people from taking the leap, taking the chance, doing stuff. They're told it's not safe, it's not a stable economy. There's this very fear based idea of going out on your own. You should trust big corporations. You should get a steady job that you hate. Like, all of this mindset is what keeps people from trying creative endeavors. But I find the people who are most successful in those endeavors are the people who are like, fuck it, let's go. We'll see what happens. I'll ride it out as long as I can. And if it doesn't work out, I'll find something else and I'll try that. And I am so awestruck and inspired by somebody like yourself doing that and being able to just say, I'm diving in head first. I'm going to do this, and setting like a goal for yourself, saying you need to make 600 a week or whatever the case may be. That is so well thought out and well planned and well executed. And I'm so happy that you not only met and exceeded that you could make the transition from, part time, just hoping that this is going to work, to it being a full-time gig, it being more than a line on your CV. Like, that's so impressive. What advice would you give to others who wanted to pursue a passion like that? It doesn't have to be storytelling, it doesn't have to be start playing, but like, it seems clear that you've had that mindset about multiple things, multiple fields, and multiple opportunities. So what would your advice to people who are maybe a little bit hesitant about it or are starting that journey, what would you tell them?
I think I would say that there's no such thing as a sure thing. So even if you get the corporate job, you're not guaranteed a safe or happy life. They
Right.
they sell you that. That's a sales pitch, right? Is if you buy into the system, um, then you're going to be safe. You're going to have, the 401k, and you're going to get insurance, and you're going to have this, and you're going to have that. But in truth, I don't think anybody has a crystal ball.
No.
And I also think one of the things that kind of crystallized for me when I got really bad COVID during the initial pandemic is you get one shot at this. You don't get do-overs. So if you spend your entire life just doing the thing purely because you think it gives you safety, you don't then get to go back and say, hey, yeah, actually I would like a refund
Yeah.
on this path that I have purchased with my time and my energy and my years. I want to do over. That doesn't come. So I guess if you if you're considering taking a risk and jumping into a career, do your best to plan for contingencies, do your research, but ultimately also know that safety's overrated to a certain degree.
Yeah,
Um, and I have always been a person who likes adventure, both fictional adventures in TTRPG settings, but then also like the real life kind of adventure. So I guess take the risk, roll the dice. We're all dice rollers here. See what
absolutely.
happens for us.
Well,
All
and
that kind of
fortune, I mean, there's lots of phrases like you only live once, fortune favors the bold. And that's absolutely true. You know, people who groundbreak, the groundbreakers of society did so with no safety net. They did so with, you know, with very little to fall back on. They really just took a risk and it paid off. And I think that, you know, obviously a lot of work and dedication is necessary, but I also think there is a small element of timing and luck that comes into these kinds of things as well. Like you can be one of the most determined, focused people in the world, but if you're in the wrong time for it, if it's not the cool or popular thing, if you don't have something to set yourself apart, like there's all these other elements just that fall into play. So I think that those things help. I definitely think they give you a leg up, but they're never going to guarantee it. Like you said, there's no sure thing. And I really think that's a really good, honest way to put it. Is like you could say we were all sold the American dream of if you work hard enough, you'll accomplish anything. That's not true. Like it's an unfortunate hot take that the American dream is kind of a lie. But
exactly.
you know, timing and luck, and if you stick to it and keep sticking to it, hopefully your time will come. And I think that's very very admirable. So you started by listing a few games. How quickly did you find your tables filling up? How quickly did you see a turnover? Because not only are you on Start Playing, which is a pretty big service. There's a lot of opportunities there. But also, you decided to do a more niche game in the World of Darkness, in Vampire the Masquerade. You decided to pick a game that wasn't a popular game like a D&D or a Pathfinder that has this like huge fan base. You picked something that was a little lesser known. Yeah, how quickly did you see a turnover on that? You said it was quicker than you expected.
So I think I filled my first table after about 2 weeks, which is not,
Wow.
it's not, I do better now, than I did then. But I was surprised, honestly. I was taken aback that I had filled the table.
And what do you think you did that made that happen? If you had to look back now with all the success you've had since then, what do you think was like, man, that was a really good choice that I made or a really good decision that really helped sell it?
So a lot of people that I have talked to who who GM professionally, and not, this is not just exclusive to World of Darkness GMs, but more generally, they want to kind of craft their sales pitch to appeal to what they think the largest possible demographic is actually looking for. So they
Right.
tend to write this very vague copy without committing too much. Um, and for me, at least, that didn't work. What worked was like, okay, here's the story that I like, and I would think is cool to tell. Nobody else is actually going to like it, but here's the story that I'm going to tell. Here's my story hook, and just putting that in the copy and going with it. And I think the specificity of it helped it to stand apart from more general adventures, which are like, in a world that's dark and there are vampires and political intrigue, having a very specific story hook, I think, differentiated me from other GMs running similar sorts of IPs.
Well, and it
So
sounds like you're a big fan of running unique material, stuff that you've created on your own. Where I've seen a lot of games that people run, you know, Curse of Strahd or Chicago by Night, or stuff that's already there's plenty of opportunities to play those types of game. And yes, storytellers bring their own thing to it, but at the end, if you've played it once, you kind of know how it's going to go no matter what. Whereas you bring something unique and new and original with a Detroit by Night, with an Atlanta by Night, stuff that there isn't pre-written material for. And I think there's something to be said for that, the mystery of it. If you've read the Chicago book, any Chicago game, or at least most Chicago games that are run, you're going to have a pretty strong understanding of what to expect. But with the unknown of like an Atlanta by Night, a setting you developed yourself and created and enriched, it's a mystery and it's exciting to learn about it and to see it. And I think that appeals to a good majority of players. I think that you're going to find more of a fan base for that than you are for pre-written material.
I think that there's definitely something to be said for home brewing your own settings. For me, it was not a calculated business decision. To be honest, I only want to do what I want to do.
Yeah.
And I don't do a good job running a story I don't like. I tend to think it's like doesn't make sense. I find it incoherent. I'm like, this character would never do that. We established her motivations in chapter 1. What are we doing here, people?
Right.
Get it together. And I don't tend to run the stories well. So home brewing works well for me. Yeah, I've seen a lot of like World of Darkness storytellers who start and then dip. So I don't have an idea. I can't speak to whether or not there's a consensus about homebrewing or not.
Sure.
I don't tend to run pre-scripted material or like the out of the box campaigns.
So one of the things that I've found that sets World of Darkness apart is the lore. Like over the 33 years, I think it had its 33rd anniversary recently of the game, there has been a lot of lore. There's been a lot of meta plot, a lot of established NPCs, a lot of stuff has happened. And it's written into the very rules themselves with lore sheets and everything like that. How much of the kind of grander overall lore do you incorporate into your games? Do you make that, a fundamental part of it? Do you just decorate with it a little bit, or do you just outright ignore it?
Um, so I think that's a good question. And I think I basically have a grab bag. I guess you could say I decorate with it. I'm not fully committed to the lore, in part because I really like to usher new players into the hobby. And if you have like all that lore baggage, it can sometimes be a barrier of entry to players who are just now coming in because that's a lot to learn.
It's
Like
a
they have so
lot. It's
many
very
names,
overwhelming. Yeah.
they have so many like secrets, and even like individual canon characters have their own huge worlds of lore that it can be overwhelming. And some of the lore I just personally don't like the mummy stuff. I can
Mm-hmm.
just yada yada over that. That was very forgettable, in my opinion. Um, so I pick what thematically works with my games and carry forward with it, and then mix what doesn't. Like some of that like Karna stuff on that lore sheet, man.
Yeah.
We don't do that in
Did
my campaigns.
did you find yourself personally enjoying the lore? And if so, what are some of your favorite characters or pieces or elements of the lore itself?
Smiling Jack. Smiling Jack is my favorite canon character. Love him. I think he's really cool. Loved him in Bloodlines.
Yeah, actually, I was going to ask about that. Do you also find yourself liking the other products that World of Darkness creates, like their video games or the card games or anything like that? Are you a fan of any of the other products that they offer?
Yes. So I actually have some original Vampire the Masquerade like Eternal Struggle cards back when it
Yes.
called Jihad.
Yep.
Like the characters had names like Rake and Raven and Flea, you know? When
Well,
it was very 90s, like painfully 90s.
and that's a perfect tie back to your story about your first campaign. Is like, yeah, it might seem cheesy or campy, but it's like that belongs in this. Like, I think
Yeah,
Vampire especially embraces, oh, and pun intended, the campiness and the cheesiness of it. Like, if you want to be called like Doom Night Stalker, like you could. There's a place for that. It wouldn't be too off brand to have a character like that in the game. And even to today, if you look at some of the pre written material, you can see characters and be like, oh, yeah, okay, a 90s kid came up with that. Like, but just based off the
exactly.
name alone or whatever.
Yeah. So I did have a soft spot for Vampire the Eternal Struggle. I haven't seen any of like the new cards, but I have like a lot of the decks. I had some of the original Jihad cards, um, which now live in a safe place. But when I first got them, I was too stupid to like set them aside to save them for posterity. They kind
Who
of been
knew,
resurrected.
right? Who knew at the time?
Exactly, exactly. Um, but yeah, Smiling Jack was my favorite canon character. I loved him in Bloodlines. I thought he was funny in like the Bruja clan books. Um, and in my world, Smiling Jack has his own lore sheet. Um,
Amazing.
I know they did him dirty by not giving him a lore sheet in the Anarch book, and I can't stand for that. Treatment of Smiling Jack. I'm gonna riot. I'm gonna revolt. I'm gonna make my own lore sheet. So he is my favorite character. What other characters do I really like and think are kind of cool?
Well, you talked about Georgia, and I know one of the Atlanta kind of lore based characters that stands out is Victoria Ash. Victoria Ash has a lot of pull in Atlanta. Do you
What's her
incorporate her into any of your campaigns or anything like that?
Toreador or something like that?
What's that?
Isn't she a Toreador or
She
something like
is.
that?
She's a Toreador.
No,
She's
I don't do
the
that.
Toreador.
I don't do that. So there's one Toreador. Her name is Annabelle. She's in
Yep.
Chicago.
Annabelle Triabelle.
She's the Toreador as far as I'm concerned. My heart has limited room for the Toreador. Who do I think is interesting? Um, I think a lot of Cedric Calhoun from Chicago
Yep.
by Night is an interesting character. I like him a lot. So is the Painted Lady, also
Mm-hmm.
in Chicago by Night. Um, Victor Temple in LA by
Victor
Night.
Temple. Yep.
Has a soft spot. I have a soft spot in my heart for Victor Temple. Um, Other than that, I think that those are kind of my favorite big players, and they were never like the Anatoles or the Lucidas or
Right.
anything like that of the clan novels or anything like that. I just I kind of like these fringe characters that do wild things.
Well, and that's something I'm hoping that they will continue to pursue in fifth edition. Because one of the things I loved about the old editions was the by night books that you could get in LA by night, you could get a Tokyo by night, you could get more material and more settings, and they've really pulled back on that in fifth edition. They're very much like make your own, do your own. Like, we're not going to supply NPCs like they used to in the old books. But I think that that's kind of missing. I really hope that they do continue to flesh out the world and give us updated renditions of some of the lore that we've had before. Because I think the rule has always existed. You can do whatever you want. But if they give us stuff for lore junkies like myself, I would love to see, how has New York developed in time? Where are they at now? What's this post beckoning, post Gehenna or currently Gehenna world look like? Because I fell in love with that material. I fell in love with those characters, and I'd love to know where they're at now and see more material about them in the modern Knights. But you, having started in the older editions and migrating into fifth edition, What do you think were some of the things they did really, really well with fifth edition, and what are some things that you wish they had done or that you didn't think were handled as well?
I think they did a good job of addressing some of the objections concerning clans like the Assamites and the Setites. Whereas the older editions really sort of othered any like non-European, non-Western clan
Right.
in a way that was really problematic. And then there was the whole issue with the Assamite clan weakness, where they get darker, like the more that they diablerize, the older they get. I think they did a good job of trying to course correct. I can also
Yeah.
say that of the material they have released in terms of like the By Night books, which is primarily like the Chicago by Night or the Fall of London, I think they have done a good job of incorporating like LGBTQ plus characters
Yep.
into the stories. You now have non-binary characters, you have trans characters, you see a variety of like queer identities, and I think that is something that is missing from the old supplement material, and something that I think there was definitely room to improve on. So I think they made this earnest effort to course
Yes.
correct.
I think they've done so much for representation, and I think it's fantastic because the World of Darkness has such a diverse fan base. Like, it is an extremely diverse fan base, probably, I dare say, one of the most diverse fan bases. And so,
Sure. Yeah.
giving that kind of representation and putting a focus on, you know, that element of the game and of the setting was really, really a smart move by them. Absolutely.
So I liked that. I thought it was well done, and I appreciated the fact that they made the effort. And this is a hot take when it comes to things that I think they haven't done as well. Maybe. I don't know. Maybe it's a hot take. We'll see. I don't think they've like radically improved like their gender situation
Okay.
here. Um I was really disappointed in the story that came along with Chicago by Night. Because although there was like technically a female character present, she was largely like cargo.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he didn't really do or say much. Like you pick her up from the airport and then you get her in the car and she doesn't really have any thoughts. If you ask her questions, she just sort of like demurs. And it's her partner Malenkov that really does the talking and has the strong opinions. And it does like the end result of Malenkov's opinions are like the player characters are clearly supposed to hate him, right? Like that's clearly
Right.
the agenda. But the female character remains kind of silent and largely passive. And then she gets to the succubus club and she kind of announces to the prince like the Lasombra's intention to join the camp. And then she more or less goes directly into the labyrinth below the succubus club. And we don't see her again for like several sessions later. So there's some caveats to that. Like there are options you can choose that give her a more agentic role. But if you sort of take like the default path, she's just sort of disappointingly passive.
Okay.
Um, and then like the whole Karna thing. I don't love the fact that she found a way to circumvent the Tremere's inability to form blood bonds, but only by like having sex with the person. That feels weird.
Yeah.
That feels weird. That feels like a choice
Right.
um, that was made. So there's still like these weird elements that creep up when it comes to female characters that I wish they didn't have and that I wish that they would improve on more. But again, that might be an opinion that's not widely shared. I
No,
don't.
I understand that, and I can actually see where you're coming from with that, and that's a very, very valid point to bring up. I think some of that old guard mentality is still very prevalent. It's still very strong, and I don't know if it's based off of trying to stay true to the old material, or if there's still some influence of that in the community. But you're absolutely right. Like, as much as they've made a lot of changes, there are still some areas they're struggling to keep up in, or that are still a little bit behind the times, as it were. So, World of Darkness went through kind of like a branch off with Chronicles of Darkness before coming back to the World of Darkness proper. Uh, and that included some mechanical changes. Like, now we've got hunger dice. Now we've got, rage dice and everything like that. And no more blood points. What are some of the mechanical changes that you really appreciate about 5th edition? And what are some that maybe you wish they hadn't done?
So I definitely like the addition of messy criticals and like bestial failures. I
Mm-hmm.
think those make gameplay really interesting. My players get really nervous whenever they get a messy crit, or like really, really anxious if they get a bestial failure. I think that is so much more compelling than a botch in the old systems.
Yes.
So I kind of find that to be my favorite part.
Yeah, they threw a new chaos element into it of like
Yeah, exactly.
exceptional success or exceptional failure. And
Right.
yeah, that
Um,
is a cool mechanics change.
I don't love the disciplines.
Okay.
You are never going to sell me on the idea that that combining obtenebration and necromancy was a cool plan. I'm never getting on board with that. I don't like it. I don't like vicissitude and protean being the same thing.
Yep.
I don't like chemistry being a combo discipline. I just don't love it. I think that the changing of these disciplines, like I don't see the argument for why we needed to do that. And I understand like there's a desire to streamline the powers that are offered and things like that. But for me, I'm never going to buy into it. I'm
Right.
never going to be sold on this new combined situation.
Yeah, they really did water down all the disciplines and kind of put them into a melting pot, which, if it was an intentional choice, I wish there was more explanation behind why they made that
Yeah.
choice. Like, if they wrote it into the story that, okay, now that the elders are going away, the blood's becoming thinner, it's intermixing, a little bit more
Sure.
explanation. Just tell us why you chose that choice. And even if it was a streamlined decision, just be honest about that too. Just be like, hey, it's
They
easier to
nerfed,
do it this way.
they nerfed the shit out of celerity.
Mm-hmm.
That really took a beating. I also think the way they changed dominate throws a lot of players for a loop when they
Mm-hmm.
come from the older editions,
Absolutely.
because they're expecting it to still work fundamentally the same, but it's virtually useless as an information gathering tool at this juncture.
Yeah.
Uh, so I don't love what they did with the disciplines. I don't do resonance in my campaigns. I don't like it.
Yeah,
Sorry.
that's fair. No, that's totally fair. I think that resonance and
Fan.
discretias and stuff are great for thin bloods. I feel like there was a huge emphasis on thin bloods in 5th edition, which fine, it makes sense kind of with the way they're taking the story, but it also added a really complicated element to everyone else. Like,
Right.
everyone else has to observe resonances and discretias, and it adds a lot of crunch to the system as far as feeding and everything is concerned.
Yeah, and I've never once had a player complain about taking away resonance as a feature
No.
of the game, because it doesn't seem to be super popular. So I like the chaos element with bestial failures and um, uh, messy crits. I think that's a great addition. Don't love the way that they did the disciplines. I'm neutral on the concept of like hunger as opposed to blood points. I initially didn't like it, but once I got accustomed to it, I'm kind of I view it as a lateral move.
Yeah.
Blood points weren't perfect mechanically. Rouse checks aren't perfect mechanically. Um, I I don't have a settled opinion on whether I like the way that some clan weaknesses are reimagined in this particular version of Vampire. Again, I think it's just different. I don't think one is better or one is worse. I think
Right.
they're just sort of different.
Yeah, it's a different reimagining, like you said, or reinterpretation of it. As far as the hunger and blood points are concerned, I do like the move because I like the part hunger dice play on, that chaos element
Power,
that we were talking about.
yeah,
You wouldn't have your messy
yeah,
criticals and stuff without it, and I think it does much better represent the struggle of the vampire, the fighting of the beast, and the combating of that. Whereas blood points, it was just kind of like, okay, I got to go get more mana. I got to go stock up
yeah.
on mana points. Versus like the chance that it could negatively impact your attempt to do something.
I think that's fair. I definitely think since it is sort of causally connected to the parts that I like, that chaos element, I definitely see the appeal of the hunger dice as opposed to blood points. But yeah, it's like if I had to pick which system I wanted, I kind of I don't know, maybe it's nostalgia. The good old fashioned blood points are
Sure,
sort of anchored in my mind as the way that we do things. But
absolutely.
I like the fact that everybody just has the same amount of hunger. And if you are more powerful, you can re-roll your rouse checks for
Hmm.
various things. But at the end of the day, we all sort of tap out at the same limit. And I do think that that egalitarian element in a game that has such vast, wild discrepancies in power is interesting.
Yeah, and even this scales a lot more. That everybody's subject to
Yeah.
hunger. Yes, there's a chance that you
Yeah,
could stave it off longer or get another chance at it, but at the end of the day, there's still only five, like
exactly.
five opportunities.
Yeah,
Uh,
I do enjoy that element. So yeah, I agree with you about that.
Now, another kind of interesting source of contention has been potency, the emphasis on blood potency over generation. Because I know generation was something that you could just blow your points on to be an elder vampire before, whereas blood potency has kind of changed the game. You could be a lower generation vampire with a high blood potency, or you could be an elder vampire with a low blood potency. And I think that's kind of an interesting choice, but also at the same time can get a little complicated or a little confusing. What are your thoughts on that?
I like blood potency. I like this fixed element of gen sort of dictating your floor and your ceiling
Yep.
in terms of your blood potency. I think that's cool. But I also like the ability that you can intuitively get more powerful if you're awake more. And then your power wanes as you're like in torpor. I think that that's a good mechanic. I also think it is horrifically complicated to explain to a new player who is just brand new to this system
Yeah.
and asks you the question, well, what's the difference between blood potency and generation? And I'm just like, all right, well, buckle up. We're going to be
Yeah.
here for a
This is
while.
this is gonna take a minute for
Yeah, we
sure.
need to have a conversation about that. I like blood potency as opposed to generation. Um,
Well, and
I
that's
think,
something unique to the characters, right? Like
yeah,
again, you could have a 12th gen who has two blood potency versus one, or you could have a 10th gen who has two blood potency or four blood potency, and so it's not a set fixed rate based on generation. There's still some flexibility and wiggle room in there to make your PCs and NPCs a little more unique.
that's what I like about the idea of choosing different discipline levels as well. In like the previous editions, if you had auspex, you go heightened
Everybody had the
senses,
same
you go,
abilities.
yeah,
Yep.
exactly. You just follow the through line of the discipline all the way to level whatever it might be. And I like the idea that you can pick and choose powers that make sense for your character, because I remember like playing characters where I'm like, what the hell am I going to do with this? Like, this doesn't make
Hmm.
any sense for my character to have.
But
I've
I need
never
the thing past it, so I have to get it to get to the thing
exactly,
I actually want. Yeah.
exactly. And I like the fact that in V5 you can actually pick and choose powers that make sense for your character to have, and that you'll be able to use. Um, I also think that I'm more in favor than against for predator types. I think I like that as a concept.
Me too. Yep. At first I was like, oh, they got rid of nature and demeanor. I hate
Yeah,
this. But then predator types I felt like brought in such an interesting and unique kind of addition. Again, making your character very unique. It's another opportunity to set yourself apart from the stereotype, but still
right.
fitting within the setting.
Yeah, I really liked the addition of the predator types. I also feel that they offer you, as a storyteller, so many opportunities to incorporate the player characters' like successes or failures into the narrative, just based on how they feed. Like it forces some players to take enemy
Yeah.
as a flaw. And then that can become a part of the story. The enemy becomes an antagonist for the party.
Yeah,
So
the
it's
predator type is a
narr-
great inspiration for the story and the building of the character. Yeah.
it's narratively a very rich addition, in my opinion.
Absolutely, absolutely. So speaking of additions, let's talk about the future. The unknown future of the world of darkness and what's going to roll out. So over the last couple of years, we've seen a pretty set standard of how they release material. They release a splat like Hunter or Werewolf or Vampire. Then they release a bunch of like, supplements to the previous splats they've released. So we're coming up on 2025. 2024 was the year of Werewolf. Werewolf was the big release. What do you think is coming in 2025, and what do you hope it'll be? What do you think is realistically coming versus what do you think you'd like to see come out?
Well, I want to see Wraith come out. I would like to see an imagining of Wraith, and I would like them to invest more in Wraith as an IP. I felt like Wraith was sort of like the ugly stepchild of the world of darkness that could have been so much more, right?
Yeah,
If it found its audience. So
absolutely.
I'm pulling for Wraith. Um, I also hope and think that Dark Ages is probably soon coming out. I liked Dark Ages. I thought it
Oh
was
yeah.
kind of fun. I don't know if I will still feel the same way as an adult as I did when Dark Ages first came out, but I think that would be interesting. Realistically, I think it's probably going to be Mage or something magey,
That's what I'm
honestly.
expecting. Honestly, I am expecting Mage. I loved the path they took up until now because they started with the big, system of Vampire, obviously, the poster child. But then they made an interesting move by dipping into Hunter because Hunter also has kind of been like a side project of theirs. They never really put the same emphasis or love behind it that they did Vampire, Werewolf, and Mage. Then they came out with Werewolf, and I was kind of hoping they were going to take another detour into a Wraith or into something, as a bridge between the large systems. Whereas if I think they rush out Mage, they've rushed out the three most popular splats. So I think a lot of interest will wane, or the opportunity to make money will wane, and to sell them on these other systems. And also, I think Mage just, if Mage was last, I would be happy because then that means they've released everything else, that they have, gotten a lot of practice, and that maybe they've worked out any kinks that Mage could have. Whereas if Mage comes out next, there's a very strong possibility it could break the entire gaming
Yeah,
system.
I think Mage was always sort of a weird game alongside the other. Um, in my opinion, and I'm not super looking forward to it being released.
Yeah.
But I do think that's probably what's coming next. I do think it's going to be very broken. I do in comparison to the other games, unfortunately.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think it's going to be either very broken or so watered down that hardcore Mage fans are going to be furious. Like, I think if they want to try and
yeah,
balance it, they're going to have to water it down significantly, which a lot of the Mage obsessed people will be very unhappy with.
I
Uh,
agree. I
yeah,
agree with you. I wish it was Wraith, but I don't think it's going to be. I think Hunter actually made sense because remember how Hunter had those video games?
Yeah.
Um, like I remember playing those video games, and I'm like, okay, sure, Hunter, you make Vampire. Vampire was clearly the biggest of your IPs. It had, it has its own market. I guess I was maybe operating under the impression that Hunter had a bigger fan base than maybe it did. It could just be that I liked it a lot.
Yeah, I've been discovering fans of Hunter, but for the most part, I've always considered it kind of this, again, like
Yeah,
this stepchild of the World of Darkness. But I think that there's something to be said for the popularity of shows like Supernatural and Buffy the Vampire Slayer that has brought hunters back into fad, like into interest. And I think you can't beat a good old monster hunting campaign or chronicle that can appeal to a pretty wide audience base. And I think that it was good that they released it second because they were really showing that humans, regular old humans, were the biggest threat to the world of darkness. Like in
right,
fifth edition, more than any
right.
other edition, it wasn't a clash of titans with all the supernaturals. They really have stressed in fifth edition that humans are to be feared, that they have a lot of power with the increase in technology and the government control and orgs and everything like that. So for them to release Hunter second, I think was a really smart choice. Like just a
Yeah,
really
the
smart choice.
centrality of the Second Inquisition in
Mm-hmm.
Vampire, I think, is probably what motivated the hasty release of Hunter.
Yeah.
Um, because a lot of people were curious. Well, okay, Vampire is making a huge deal about these Second Inquisition guys. What are they all about? I want to check out that side of the story. And so I think it
Absolutely.
makes sense as a natural, like, second release. Werewolf made sense because, like, Werewolf was always like the younger sibling to Vampire competing with it for
Absolutely.
attention.
And very popular, extremely popular. Like I felt like Werewolf didn't quite rival Vampire, but it was up there. It was very, very, very
Yeah.
close.
And then of course, yeah, Mage, like that Mage is the third favorite. If we ever get Wraith, I will be a
I will be
happy
very pleased.
indeed.
I really hope they do. I know there's also been like resurgence of changeling love, and a lot of people really loved Changeling from Chronicles of Darkness, Changeling the Lost versus the Dreaming. And so I think that there are a lot of people looking forward to Changeling. I'm very, very curious to see how they go about it, if they do incorporate elements of the Lost, because we've seen them incorporate elements from Chronicles in 5th edition that didn't previously exist. So I'm interested if they're going to take the dreaming angle or if they're going to take the lost angle as far as Changeling and how that gets released. But I know it's been a big, especially amongst this community, among the St. Pete community, there's been a big calling for Changeling. And I think Changeling would be a good one to release right before Mage. But I do hope it's Wraith. I really, really do hope it's Wraith.
Wraith made sense, right? You got all
Yeah.
your monsters, right? You
Yep.
got your classic monsters.
Well, it's a great question of like what happens after death, and now that they've introduced the Umbra with Werewolf, that like that how does the Umbra play into the Shadowlands, and like there's an opportunity here to further expand the universe at an increment
World
that is
building.
understandable.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. Um, I always found like the whole, Umbra versus Shadowlands versus like um what did they call it? At the astral plane,
the
when you
Astral
could
Plane.
astral project in Vampire. The way that those overlapped and intersected to be really super interesting. Um, and I didn't think it was fleshed out well enough in my opinion. Um, and I hope we see more of that because I agree with you. It is an excellent opportunity for lore building or world building, but I also think I personally like scary games. And I just never found Mage or Changeling to be very scary. Not
Yeah, it
with the
felt cartoonish as opposed to what they'd already established with Vampire and Werewolf and Hunter and all these other kids. then Changeling kind of came out of left field for me. Now, to be fair, I'm not as experienced or knowledgeable about Changeling as some of the people out there who could probably argue with me and are screaming at their screens right now. But I felt like it was such a strong departure from what they had done so far and what they had kind of painted as the landscape of the world of darkness, to throw in an element like Fae and Changeling, uh, and then also Mage at some points. It just felt like it was a strong, strong departure from what they had done. And so I'm kind of nervous about that. I'm kind of nervous about injecting the dreaming or something into the game, because while a talented storyteller can make something out of anything, I do think that it does distort the overall view.
Yeah, I'd be happy if they just kept it to mere conventional horror antagonists. I would be happy with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um,
So, as we're getting close to the end here, I want to pay some bills. I want to have support you as best as I possibly can in what you're doing here. So, I want to encourage our players to go check out your website, which can be found over at, let me get the website link here so I can say it right, atomicbombshellgames.com/Atlanta-by-night. This website is incredible. Like, I love how animated and interactive it is. It's very immersive. It looks very professionally done and so well put together. And it's a great landing zone for people who are looking into you and checking out what you do. And I think it does really entice people to want to get involved and want to join it. So I want to give you an opportunity here to kind of give a sales pitch, or people who might be interested in your games. What could they look forward to or find? What's a hook to bring them to go check that out and to sign up for it?
ah, so excellent. I'm happy to give my elevator pitch. So the premise of Atlanta by Night centers around a nightmare shared by the sensitive kindred community. It's a nightmare of an empty hospital bed and the sound of machinery whirring and the murmur of staff. It doesn't make a lot of sense to anyone. And it seems quite out of place because Atlanta, at least as I have described it or created it, is your quintessential Southern Gothic setting. Um, Everybody's frozen in stasis. There hasn't been a lot of change over the course of the centuries. But this nightmare is coming in the lead up to a celebration of the Camarillas' defeat of the Sabbat, which happened 7 years ago. The prince thinks this is going to be auspicious, but rather than this being an auspicious celebration, there's a feeling of mounting dread. So the overall thrust of the campaign is one, attempting to figure out what these nightmares mean before we collide with whatever destiny is waiting for us, in the hopes that we can solve the mystery, solve the riddle, and then take action to avoid a potentially very serious outcome. I will say that headquartered in Atlanta is the CDC, which is something to think about when we're talking about an empty hospital bed. So it leans heavily into the supernatural aspects of vampire and heavily into the themes that you see in Southern Gothic literature. So alienation, the collision of tradition with the modern world, a critique of how those traditional values serve only a segment of the population, and all of that good stuff. It's going to be good times. Knock on table. It's going to be good times. So we'll see.
Yeah,
Come
and
and
people can
say
get
hi.
involved with your campaign through your website. They can also get involved in your Discord community, which I recently joined, and it's a
Yes, I
very,
saw
very
that.
cool feature about you as a professional storyteller, is that you've created this communal aspect. Because a lot of previous storytellers I've talked to, their tables are very like separated. There isn't a lot of crossover, not just story wise, but player wise. You've created this entire community, and so we're going to have it down in the links of the description of the video. But you can join Byrne Baby Byrne's Discord at discord.gg/SGA capital D N capital A 5QJX. But again, just click on the link down below. Don't bother remembering that. But yeah, it is a very, very cool Discord community. You have all of your games listed there. You have a lot of channels for people to interact. It does have a very good way of just making you feel like you're part of something bigger, part of something grander. And you're very interactive on there. There's a lot of back and forth. It's a very, very cool community you've created over there. So, do you want to talk about that a little bit more?
Sure. The Discord community is a pretty big community. I think we have significantly over 100 members of the community. I don't know exactly how many.
128.
128, yeah. So 100 and some change. All of my games are there. There are places for the various cities to interact and intersect and talk and gossip and engage in a lot of, like, there's a lot of conspiracy theorizing in that server about things that are going on. I encourage it. I welcome. It's also just a fun place to be if you enjoy talking about anything vampire adjacent. It is an 18 plus server, so no kids.
Right.
But
The World of Darkness is just kind of 18 plus in general, even
yeah,
though
I
I
agree.
started at 14, but still.
Yeah, I started at 13. So yes. Um, it's a good place to come and hang out. It's also where you will find the latest postings of any of my games or any of my other updates. And it's also a fun place to have a chat about the direction of the World of Darkness and other IPs.
Absolutely. So, for those of you who are looking to expand your World of Darkness, I can't suggest enough going and joining this Discord. It's got a lot of similarities to the St. Pete Discord, and that's fantastic. It's just another way to expand the environment, expand the community, show connections in between, and I absolutely love it. Also, you provided a handy dandy QR code, which I'm going to put on screen now.
I
So, for
love QR codes. I cannot get over.
absolutely. For those of you who aren't into typing in links or clicking on stuff, you can scan this QR code that you see on your screen now to be taken directly to the Atlanta by Night website, where you can get involved in this amazing community and support Byrne Baby Byrne in their endeavors and their continuation of this amazing, amazing journey that they've been on so far. So, I would ask you next, how do people sign up? How do people get into your games? How do those who are interested and like what they've heard so far, what's the best way for them to get into your World of Darkness?
So the best way to get into my World of Darkness is to sign up for an account on Start Playing Games, which is a ever-growing community of TTRPG lovers. They host not only vampire games, but werewolf, wraith, mage, all the kinds of stuff that you could want to play. And that is where I run my paid games. So that is the easiest place to come and find me. I will say, my personal conviction is that once a campaign starts, I close open enrollment just because it helps to protect the integrity of, like, the existing player experience. So sign up for those games quickly if you're interested.
Yeah, I'm going to throw that page up on screen now. You can go over to startplaying.game/gm/Byrne_baby_Byrne. This will be also in the links down below, so if you don't remember that, don't stress. You will have a quick click access to get into that webpage there. But it looks like you have many, many opportunities listed, but it looks like they're filling up fast. So if you're interested in getting involved in this, head on over to Start Playing and get into one of those sessions as quickly as possible. Again, that's startplaying.games/gm/Byrne_baby_Byrne. This has been such a fantastic conversation, and I appreciate you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. And it's just been so great to hear your perspectives, to hear your story. Do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share with our wonderful viewers before we put a bow on this thing for the night?
I don't know. I think that maybe that That is a very open-ended question, sir.
It's meant to be.
It is a very dirty storyteller trick to ask the person an open-ended question and then watch how they
You didn't realize you were playing a game the whole time.
So yeah, what I want to say is, um, if you even have a small interest in taking up role-playing games as a hobby, I think that you should give it a try. I have found that it can really be a good source of validation, a good way to make friends, a good way to explore your own identity, and it has a lot to offer. So I encourage anybody who is role-playing game curious to come and give it a shot. And I especially want to emphasize that marginalized voices who sometimes have not historically been heard in TTRPG settings or nerd culture more generally, to come and give it a shot, even though it can seem somewhat daunting and there can be a question of whether you belong, because I think the hobby really needs and craves those perspectives.
Absolutely.
So now's the moment where I think you will find a community and a place in this hobby. So I think those, and if you want to GM, do professionally, do it.
Just go for
You
it. Go for
yeah,
it.
roll the dice, right? The worst that can happen is that you fail, and then it's a lesson learned. You put it on your CV. It's a cool story to tell, you know, your friends at the pub or your dog or your grandkids or whatever suits your life. That's
Definitely.
kind of my final thoughts.
Well, thank you so much for joining me tonight. It really did mean the world to me that you were willing to do this. And I think you have such an incredible story of going from, just a new hobby to attract the attention of a guy to making a living off of this and making it so important to your everyday life, creating so much content for people out there and opportunities for people. That is just an incredible, incredible effort. And it was so nice and such an honor to be able to highlight you and all of that tonight on the stream here.
I will also say, not a good way to get the guy or the girl or the envy. Um,
No. But you'll meet a lot of cool people along the way, and that is actually a really, really good part about TTRPGs and why we all still do it. But thank you so much to my guest, Byrne Baby Byrne, for joining us here tonight. I'm Kent, Misha Kent on all social media, but that's not really important. I don't post anywhere anyway. What you should do is go follow St. Pete by Night on all that social media listed down below. And if you're interested in the world of darkness, go join Byrne Baby Byrne server or join our server. There is an invite link to the St. Pete by Night Discord, or both, preferably both, preferably
yeah,
both.
exactly.
Uh,
That's what we want.
yeah, and check out our streaming schedule. We've got shows 4 or 5 days a week on average, so you can see Vampire the Masquerade Chronicles, you can see Hunter the Reckoning Chronicles, you can see Werewolf the Apocalypse Chronicles, and if you join our communities, there's opportunities to join games. We host one-shots on a regular basis, so get into the world of darkness, because the world of darkness needs your support to continue to be the amazing experiences it has been. But thank you to my guest. Thank you all to watching. Have a lovely evening, everyone, and we'll see you next time. Good night.
See you later.